Hi, I'm Town Manager Stephen Crane, and I'd like to welcome you to Chairs in Chairs. This is a program where we talk to chairs of local boards and committees to get a better sense of what they do and how they serve the town. With me is Chair of the Conservation Commission, Al Laakso.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for coming here. So Al, tell us a little bit about your background on the Conservation Commission, how long you've been serving, and how long you've been the chair.
Well, I've been on the Conservation Commission since 1994, and I've served as treasurer and currently as the chairperson for about 10 years.
So there are a lot of boards and committees in Longmeadow, but not all boards and committees are created equal. Many of them are advisory to are appointed by the Select Board and are advisory to the Select Board. The Conservation Commission is appointed by the Select Board, but they actually have regulatory authorities. Talk to me a little bit about where those regulatory authorities come from and what they're used for.
Well, let's start at the beginning. That when the Conservation Commissions were first created in 1958, their sole responsibility was to identify land for conservation purposes and then to acquire the means to procure that. And the original Conservation Commissioners did an outstanding job in identifying land to be acquired, and the residents did a super job also of supporting those requests by approving the money to acquire conservation land. So that in Longmeadow we have about 625 acres of land protected as conservation land. But then in 1972, the Wetlands Protection Act was adopted by the state legislature. And the act gave the responsibility for administration, the regulations, to the Department of Environmental Protection and the municipal conservation commissions. So then all of a sudden we did a flip-flop on what we were spending our time on, because anytime somebody was going to do a project in a wetland resource area, they needed to come to the Conservation Commission to discuss their plans and to get a permit from us to go forward.
So I think one of the things that would surprise Longmeadow residents is the vast amount of land that actually is within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. I think while we do have the Connecticut River flowing through our community, we don't have a lot of lakes or what people perceive as large streams, but we do have a lot of areas that qualify as wetlands in our dingles and in our other and that run throughout our community. And I guess talk to us a little bit about how far you need to be from one of those streams or dingles or wetlands, or how close you need to be to need a Conservation Commission permit.
Sure.
And how much of the community is really covered by the Concom.
Well, if you look at a map of Longmeadow, you'll see that we have 4 major brooks that run from east to west into the Connecticut River. And then connected to all of those are all the infamous, or famous dingles, I should say, in town that tend to collect the rainwater and channel it, so that we have a lot of minor streams located along that. So it really covers the whole town as far as wetland areas, because you can go right up to the East Longmeadow line where Longmeadow Brook begins and find regulated areas. So if there is a wetland and what we call an intermittent stream, then if the project is going to be within 100 feet of the resource area, they need to come to the Conservation Commission to get a permit. If they happen to be within 200 feet of a perennial stream, which the state identifies as a river, then there's a 200-foot boundary, technically known as riparian zone on each side. And for those, they have to come forward to us for a permit.
How many times a year would you say that the Conservation Commission reviews applications for projects in town and issues permits?
Well, normally, we schedule ourselves for 2 meetings a month throughout the year. And some years ago, a new feature was put in for requests for determination of applicability compared to the more formal notice of intent. And the idea was with the DEP to speed up the regulatory process. So nowadays, most of the people who come in for what we call an RDA, request for determination of applicability, and we'll probably see about a dozen of those a year. For the more detailed projects, a notice of intent needs to be prepared. For example, the new DPW facility has wetland resource areas on both sides. So they had to go through the regulatory process of delineating that area and preparing a notice of intent in order to get the approval to move forward.
How many members are there of the Conservation Commission?
7.
7 members.
And we have openings for 2 associate members if people are interested in doing that. And that has often been a source for people becoming full-time voting commissioners. The associate commissioners do not vote.
Do not vote. And people can apply for or submit an application for voluntary boards and committees like the Conservation Commission, actually in my office at Town Hall, if anyone's interested in that. So it's obviously, we're in the fall here, and it's a big busy time for people in Long Meadow. We have a lot of trees, a very healthy tree canopy, which leads to an extraordinary amount of leaves. Many people have private contractors come and take their leaves and haul them off. Others use clear leaf bags that are collected twice a year or twice in the season by our solid waste hauler Waste Management. And then the third way is to load up your own vehicle and bring them down to our leaf disposal site off of West Road. And what I think people don't realize is that leaf disposal program is a highly regulated program because it takes place in the floodplain. And it has a long history through the Conservation Commission. And I think I'd like to have you tell me about it, but what I want the folks at home to know is it is an extraordinary savings for the town to be able to dispose of the leaves this way as opposed to hauling them off to another disposal site. And it's really a great benefit to the community. I'm down there, unfortunately, a couple of times a weekend at least. But to talk to me about the history of the LEAF program and what its primary role is in the floodplain.
Well, I first moved to Long Meadow in 1964. So when we had leaves or yard waste, there were 2 areas also in the floodplain that the leaves were just brought in and deposited and left there, and the same thing with the yard waste. And then as the solid waste programs began to be developed by the state, they put the kibosh on that. So then the question came up is, what are we going to do with the leaves? Now, the unique, with the people on the Conservation Commission, many years ago, as they thought their way through this, they realized that conservation land in the floodplain could be used to collect the leaves because that land was being farmed. And by collecting the leaves and tilling them into soil, that tended to go through the microbiological degradation and refreshing of the soil. And but then the issue came, well, how do we do this? Because it is against state law to bring any solid fill into a floodplain. If a person brings solid fill in, number one, they need a permit from the Conservation Commission, but then they had to provide compensatory storage to say, okay, if I'm going to use this area, then I'll make up for it in this area, which has to have the same hydrological connection. And
so to break that down, because we went through this with our existing DPW facility, it is at the altitude is 56 feet above sea level, if you look at the topographical map.
right.
And if you bring in solid fill and through your permit with the Conservation Commission and raise, say, a 1 acre parcel to 56 feet, you have to go and remove fill from another 1 acre parcel, basically in the same lane, in the same area, down to 54 feet. So it always has to balance out. And that's one of the primary reasons why the new DPW could not be built in the current location.
Well, what's unique about the technique that was worked out, the thought process at the time was if the leaves were going to be tilled into the soil, then they should become part of the original floodplain. But then the question was, well, how are we going to prove that? So when the first permit was issued, there was the requirement that the DPW was to check the elevation of the farm fields. And we've been doing that since 1988. And every year the DPW submits the elevations levels to the Conservation Commission for review. As a matter of fact, at our last meeting, we reviewed the results. And it always tends to be somewhat exciting to see that it's not going up. So that year after year, we've been able to verify that we're in compliance, that we're consuming the leaves. And so as a result, it's a tremendous cost saving to the town compared to all those leaves had to be hauled off site.
Yeah, it's a great expense, and as you noted at the beginning, it refreshes the soil so the farm ground stays fertile and is desirable to local farmers. Just for the folks at home, we have an arrangement with a farmer, a gentleman by the name of Tom Baggett, who has been managing our leaf program and farming the land down there for many years. And it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where he provides the labor and materials for a fee to the town to dispose of the leaf program. And it's a very labor-intensive program. If you haven't been down to the leaf disposal site, it's a pretty vast area, and the piles of leaves that get delivered there are substantial. And the technique has to be very precise because, as you noted, the elevation has to stay exactly the same. In exchange for a deeply reduced rate to manage the leaf program, Mr. Baggett is able to grow crops on that same ground, and I know I've spoken to him, and he enjoys being down there. He values the ability to farm that land highly, and it's really kind of a unique and a well thought out program.
Well, the other interesting thing is that he does a soil analysis every year. And over the years, he's been able to reduce the amount of nitrogen that he needs to put down there because of the leaves that are being mulched in tend to surrender the nitrogen during the growing season.
One of the things that you've corrected me on, I hear people all the time talk about going down to the leaf dump. And it's important to note that it is a leaf disposal site, and words matter, and I think that calling it a leaf dump signifies that leaves just get dumped there like they did many years ago and nothing happens. But the leaves are actively disposed of into the soil, and like you said, since 1988, we've been able to provide this service to the community at a greatly reduced cost and impact to the environment.
Well, the key is the management of the collection area. Because the DPW staffs that area with the DPW employee, and that person supervises the vehicles coming in to verify that they do have a town recycling sticker. And then he's also monitoring what they're bringing in, because we don't want any stump, we don't want any yard waste, we don't want any solid waste that is going to mess it up.
Right.
Now, many of the people are coming in with plastic bags. And so during the season, we place a dumpster in that area so that when the bags are emptied, the plastic bags get placed into the dumpster so they don't get blown around the area.
And I think that's important to note because if you have pumpkins left over from Halloween or you cut branches in your yard or something, it's important that you bring that to the recycling center on Pondside Road and not down to the leaf disposal site. The hours in the fall are limited because at the recycling center, because we do have to have those same people staffing the leaf disposal site, which is open till 5 p.m.
Let me point out another unique feature that we have, is that the farm area that's being used is known as the Gassick Farm Conservation Restriction. That Louis Gassick was a farmer who farmed the land, and then eventually, when he got out of the farming business, the Conservation Commission, Town of Long Meadow, supported by the state, obtained that property. So that in addition to the oversight by the Conservation Commission, we are also overseen by the State Department of Conservation and Recreation. So there is a conservation restriction owned by the DCR, the state, and it's a legal document. You can go down the Registry of Deeds, you can see it there. And it stipulates a whole bunch of things that you can and cannot do. Unfortunately, one of the things that was written into that conservation restriction was the ability to farm the land and for the leaf composting to take place. And last year we did have a person from the DCR come out to inspect our fields, and she walked hither and yon, checking everything out very carefully to see that we were complying with the requirements of the conservation restriction.
That's a great point, because I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway, because I get asked the question by residents somewhat frequently. Why can't we put playing fields down there?
There's a distinction between conservation and parkland. And when the Conservation Commission bill was installed in 1958, it was very distinct. The conservation land was for passive recreation. Playing soccer, playing baseball, and everything like that, that's considered a park operation.
An active recreation.
Active recreation. So that when that's come up, you know, we've always said state law does not allow us to use the land for that purpose.
As you identified, there's over 600 acres of conservation land. The Gassick Farm area that we were just talking about, the leaf disposal site, is 140 of that, about thereabouts?
That's close. It's like 111 acres that are included in the contract with Bagot.
Where are the other areas in the community?
Well, we have the Pomeroy plot. There were two farmers at the end of town on Longmeadow Street, just off and behind, and those were farmed by Tabor and Pomeroy. And then as they got elderly and got out of the farming business, the Conservation Commission was able to obtain that land. And that's where now we have the community gardens in that spot. So we make land available for residents that want to put in a garden in that area at no cost to them. The only cost is there is water there, but they have to share the cost of the water.
And it's a highly desirable gardening plot. And I know a few people who do garden down there, and they're pretty competitive about the vegetables they grow, but it is a wonderful community asset. So the Pomeroy plot, which is on Longmeadow Street, just down across from, I think, it's Massachusetts
Meadow.
Ave. Yeah, or Meadow Road. It's on the east side of Longmeadow Street, right by the traffic light there.
Correct.
Where else?
Well, we're pretty much all around town, because there are many people that had wetland areas next to their house, and we've had some that, as they sold the property and passed it along, they wanted that wetland resource area, so they deeded it over to the town under the care, custody, and control of the Conservation Commission. So we've got, and along Longmeadow Street, where the four major brooks are, a lot of the side lots in that, belong to conservation. The other big area, there's a sign up there called the Barnard Woods. And there was a gentleman by the name of Barnard who had that whole area back in there, and he donated that as conservation land. And the Long Meadow Brook runs through that area.
Mm-hmm. So, in your time on the Conservation Commission, is there any particular decision or action that the Conservation Commission has taken that you're especially proud of?
Well, it's the overall being able to work with the residents when they want to do a project, so that they can get together us. There's usually a pre-meeting site visit discussion. They tell us what they want to do, and we'll work with them to help them put their project in and meet the regulations and protect the wetlands. So over the years, I look upon and say, well, we're customer oriented, the people coming in, and it's over the years there have been a very small number of projects that we have denied. But the thing we're running into now is, as the town is basically built out, people are looking at lots that were never developed because there's wetlands up there. And they've hired a wetland consultant to come out and evaluate, look at it, and figure out, well, here are my boundaries, and we can stick a house in here. And it just makes us very uncomfortable about doing that, because with all of our dingles in town and streams, there have been some very serious problems with erosion. And when it comes to water in the end always wins out. So that we do have a slope requirement of how far away from the edge of the stream the foundation has to be to prevent erosion.
Yeah, there are a number of cases of that right now that when they were built, they seemed to be in a good location, but because of the increase in severity of storms and increased erosion, the bank, like you said, the banks of the streams are getting closer and closer. In fact, the new DPW site that you just mentioned is a good example of that, where the houses on the north side of the dingle look a lot closer to it than they probably did 20 years ago.
Right. And the other problem during the development of the town, in many cases, fill was brought in. And in some cases, the contractors just plowed over or bulldozed over the tree stumps and things. And so over time, those tend to deteriorate, and we've had erosion because of the slope just giving away.
Yep. Is there anything else you wanted to let the good folks at home know about the Conservation Commission?
Well, we're always open to people coming aboard to join us. For a number of years, we were not up to the full complement of 7 people, but there is turnover. And, we think our mission is an admirable one. In my case, with a technical background, when I was first approached about serving on the Conservation Commission, once I began to study all the regulations and stuff, I realized, well, that fits in with my working in a technical basis, because we have state and local laws and regulations that we have to abide by. And it gets very complex with all of the issues that may arise.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to thank you for your service to the Conservation Commission and to the community generally. I know you enjoy it very much, which is why you've been at it since 1994 and haven't shown me any signs of slowing down on it. For the folks at home, the Conservation Commission is an essential regulatory committee for the town, and from firsthand experience, I can tell you they are very customer oriented and really want to help people achieve their goals so long as they comply with the regulations. And you and the other members of the CONCOM have provided an invaluable level of service, and we thank you for that, and we thank you for being here on Chairs and Chairs.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that very much.